All right, Ash, let's
Okay.
go. So well, I guess we can kick this off. We're Zengig, of course. Specifically, this is our Gen X, Y, and Z show that is a new series for us, where we are talking about things that happen in the workplace in the perspective of different generations, and how we all look at the same thing from a different perspective. And today's episode is about South Park. I mean, South Park. I think Ashley, it was out before you were born. If
I'm pretty
that's
sure it's on season 26.
It is.
So,
It has been out since before you were born. I'm certain.
yeah.
I'm certain of it. So it's been, South Park does a great job of tackling things that are happening in current events, and this one, I think this one's a little sensitive. What do you guys think? You've obviously seen the show. What do you think?
Uh,
Um,
yeah, I mean it is, but I mean for the target audience of South Park, maybe it's not as much because it's poking fun at I guess employers and employees. So although it's hard to say with South Park, South Park has literally gone all over the map. So saying that
yeah.
it's a sensitive issue is like describing every single episode.
Yeah, that's very true. I just think that this episode really hits at some of the sensitive things that younger generations now take very seriously. And I don't know if what you.
I mean, not me, but Generation Z. Oh, yeah.
So let's
Yeah.
let's go ahead and get into it. Ashley, go ahead and play the let's play the
Okay.
clips and see what we think about them.
Okay. Here's the first one.
Well, I guess these days it's real hard for businesses to find people to work, so they'll take whatever they can get.
I want to take whatever I can get.
It's what they call the Great Resignation labor shortage. So now, if you have your parents' permission, there's some jobs they'll even let kids do.
That is messed up. Why does he get to have a job? I want a job.
The Great Resignation. See, now it's made it to South Park, so I feel like that's one of the things though it's been talked about now for years. So I'm glad they finally did an episode where they kind of make fun of it.
So interestingly, I think that the Great Resignation is so often associated with COVID, even though it was a term that existed pre-COVID. It was coined in 2019, and it was really directed more at baby boomers retiring. But it's kind of blended all together now and associated with not only COVID and government funds that were given out to with the I guess the thought that people wouldn't want to work, right? That's been something people don't want to work anymore. So that is not directed at my generation, of course. That's directed at I think Gen Z more than anyone. So Ashley, where do you think that comes from?
Um, I mean, I don't know. We just started getting back into the work. Like, this is our first time, getting jobs since a lot of us are getting out of school. So I'm not really sure about that one. That one's.
Well, the Great Resignation is kind of now it's a catch-all term for like just the fact that I guess it's that there's more jobs than there are employees, so the employees have the ability to just leave and go somewhere else. So I think that's become like kind of a whole. People are like, that's the Great Resignation, the shift in the labor market, really. So that's what I see is more than whenever you hear people are like, nobody wants to work anymore. Nobody wants to work at bad jobs, I guess. But
Well, no one wants to work, period, right? If they didn't have to. I mean, and that's okay.
and
Like,
that's
let's establish that if you are going to work in a job, whatever that job might be, just for the income, which most people have to do, it's not by choice as much as it is necessity, and that's okay. Now at Zengig, of course, we talk a lot about encouraging people to find something they genuinely enjoy, but that's pretty rare. We also know that if you just think of 100 people who how many do you think wake up on a Monday morning and genuinely look forward to going to work? What would you say that percentage is?
20%, but that's why we got bare minimum Mondays, right?
We'll get to that in a second, but that's high. Do you really think it's 20%? The 20%, like one out of five?
Well, you said like their job or love their job.
Well, let's start with like.
I mean, I would say 20%. Like I think if you if you enjoy parts of your job and you don't actively hate it, like that's pretty good. And I would say that that's, a third of the workforce, I would hope, can at least say that like that they're like content with their job. I guess
Ricky said, let's be honest, if people had the opportunity to work less and getting paid more, they would gladly go that route.
Oh, obviously, yeah.
Well, of course, and so that's not a bad thing. Like we see, it's often used by people who are older, and they're like, as if they're taking a shot at the younger generation. I'm like, I want to be independently wealthy. Who doesn't? I mean, I think that's a given, and you should have. We all like to have a choice to go spend our day however we want, but very few actually have it. So most of us have to work. So then the question becomes is anyone not working because they don't want to work? That's a different level to me. And I think that's often how it's used. Like people aren't working because they don't want to. No one's ever wanted to work, so why should they not be working now because of it?
That's a good point. I think it's more like people are less willing to put up with stuff than they were before. So that's really what you're looking at. Like the amount of like people wanting to work versus not wanting to work is the same as it's always been. I would expect. I would expect that back in the, even the 90s, 80s, 70s, you didn't want to go to your job, but you had to, so you just did it. You internalized it maybe.
Well,
and people are saying it out loud.
I think what you pointed out a few minutes ago with the number of jobs available relative to the number of job seekers, it's almost 2 to 1 right now, which is historically incredibly high. That's never existed before. So now I think it's employers have to fight harder to fill their jobs. And although that's sort of subsided, I mean, being in staffing, we see this as it plays out. And this time a year ago, very much the case where employers were employees held all the cards. But I think over the past 6 months, that has really shifted back to I'll say neutral for now, where I don't think it's a strong employee or employer's market. I still think it's a good time to be on the job market because of so many openings. But all the layoffs we've seen, those are real. That trend is definitely slowing down. I mean, the jobs report that came out last Friday indicates that there's not as many jobs being created in the U.S. right now as there have been over the past year. So it's definitely changing.
Yeah, I think that for the next decade, as more baby boomers retire and go out of the market, like that's going to continue to shift. Like I don't think it's ever going to go back, maybe because COVID artificially inflated the kind of numbers, but I do think it's going to be the employees are going to have a stronger argument for this type of thing. So and that with the growing needs of the needs and desires of Gen Z, the labor market is changing and is going to change. And employers are like, whether they like it or not, everything that's covered in it, like it is a thing, and it's a thing that employers and employees have to deal with.
Well, I mean, we all have experienced it in retail stores and restaurants where you see tables that are empty that can't be seated because there's not enough wait staff. Mm-hmm. And that's where I think South Park is going with this as much as anything else, is to say they'll even hire kids. I mean, I think the South Park kids are supposed to be in like 5th grade, right? So that's a little extreme.
I think they're 9. Yeah.
Yeah, that they would hire them. But
5th grade since 98.
Right. But companies or small businesses in particular at times, like the example here, of course, the ice cream shop that they probably do have a very difficult time filling all of their jobs right now. Yeah. All right, should we go to the next one?
Yeah. Okay, ready?
Eric, you can't just sit there at a table.
Yeah, I can. It's Monday.
So
haven't you heard of Bare Minimum Mondays? It's a thing that young people have created because we care about our mental health.
I don't care if it's Bare Minimum Mondays. Eric, you need to come.
Break time. I'll be back.
All right.
Oh man.
All right. We're let's talk mental health days. Now there's another clip we have on that. Ashley, do you want to play that one too, or
Yeah. Let me see.
Was it 3?
I think it was 3.
We can lump these two together.
Yeah.
Why?
'Cause it's your job, Eric.
Whoa, Butters.
This one's toxic.
Okay. So yeah. So hold on to that one for the moment. So,
okay.
But there's 2 things in this, right? But let's just talk mental health days. Where did that come from?
mental health days have always been a thing. They just haven't been called mental health days. I mean, they used to say like playing hooky, like call off from work and stuff like that's the same thing. You know, people always take a personal day to do whatever. It hasn't been like explicitly stated like I just need a day to do nothing or whatever.
I feel like it's a millennial invention because again, since
That's a Gen
Z
Z invention.
we just started working though.
Years.
Yeah, no, Peter.
Yeah.
I'm with Ashley 100%. This thing is, I first heard the term probably, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago, maybe 8, where someone was like, an employee of ours said, I need a mental health day. And I was like, well, when I hear mental health, I think something of a very serious nature. I'll be honest. I mean, I don't anymore, but when I did, I was like, oh dear God, is this, a mental health day? Like, do you need professional help from this? Is there any, this sounds very serious, but no, it was, I think more of, well, my job is stressing me out and I need a break from it. Isn't that really what it is?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
Yeah. And I feel like, now Gen Z is, starting to take that and run with it and make it even worse. Like, I think we're getting more exaggerated with it. And I feel like now, like, since we just started working, we feel as though like it's a necessity to have mental health breaks.
Here's the way I see it. Like mental health, whether it's your mental health, whether it's your physical health, like it shouldn't matter to me. Like if you want to take a personal day, like go take a personal day, whether you've got to go take a doctor's appointment or whether you just want to go fishing or something like, and just like chill out, like what, that shouldn't matter. I feel like it's, maybe something that people are saying out loud, like it's all about like just your mental health. I don't really care what you do. Go take a day off if you're going to take a day off, but just like it should all be lumped together, I guess.
So that's a great point, because as no employer, when you hear I'm taking a mental health day, it just sounds weak. I mean, it's like when the going gets tough, I'm going somewhere else. That's what it sounds like to the employer. Whether the employee intends for it to sound like that is different, but it just I struggle with it, because to your point, like if you need to take a day off, go take a day off for whatever reason. I don't need to know why, but if you tell me it's because you just need, like, I can't separate mental health from seriousness, and the way this is used. And I think it's often used today is like, oh, well, I just want to relax today. I need a break from work. And like, it's work. It's supposed to be hard. By definition, it's not. There's a reason you get paid for it. So just arbitrarily saying, hey, suddenly work is stressing me out, I need to leave. Like, no, I struggle with that. It's just not something that I believe existed up until very recently. I think
it does seem like, younger workers are traditionally, they're changing, they're rebelling against like the, traditional like career structure. So it is redefining, I think, like the whole way that employees, like they function with each other. So the focus on mental health, well, it's important. I just think that like anything, it gets abused and taken over. Like if you're like, hey, I've been really working hard and, it's getting to me and I just need to like go. I mean, it's the same thing. You go on a vacation and you like let your brain just like turn off and like unplug for a little bit. And it is good for you. Just so I think it's that same idea. It's just in a lot of places it's being, maybe taken advantage of.
Okay. So
Stacy from LinkedIn said, when I first started in public accounting, we were strictly told to take our vacation. It was meant to give us a break from the job. It was a time to recharge and come back energized. Yeah.
And I think that's a good, way to, like, you have it, use it. So maybe it's the hustle culture that people are like, I'm not going to take a break ever. I'm not going to. And so now the pendulum is swinging the complete opposite direction, I think.
Well, okay. So, but let's separate a vacation that's planned in advance and where versus the way this is being referenced here, which is suddenly Cartman's being asked to work and he declares that he needs a mental health day. That is my perception of how this phrase has become to be used as well. It's not a serious thing. I mean, Ricky commented that a World Mental Health Day is October 10th. Okay, again, when I see that, I take that seriously. I think, but this way of using it, it's almost taking a serious term, something that has real meaning to real people, and applying it to just fragility, it just to a significant degree. So I guess my question to you guys is, would you use that? Would you say, I need a mental health break today? And say, I can't work today, even though someone may be counting on you. It wasn't scheduled in advance or planned. You just declare on the fly, I need a mental health day. Is that something you'd say?
I mean, I think to me, it sounds kind of unprofessional, especially if no one's going to be there to take my place. There's going to be all this work. I feel like, you're given PTO for a reason. If, let's just say, you need a break next week, use your PTO day. And then if you run out, then that's your fault. But I think
you could make the argument,
be more professional about it.
You can make the argument that if all right, so I'm sick and I got to take out, like, how is that any different than if you're going to say that, like, someone's relying on me for something, like, that's important. But at the same time, if, you're like, oh, well, this isn't going to get done because I wasn't there, or, they're short staffed, or that's the employer's problem. That's not my problem. I'm not, unless you're like a senior, person at the company, or somebody who actually makes those decisions. If you're just a random mid-level person, or even low, entry-level person at a, say a call center or something like that, and you're like, hey, I just started this job, whatever. My car has a flat tire, I got to call out today, or I've got to be sick today, or whatever the reason. If that's going to put a significant strain on the business, that is a larger issue than you're in, one day out or whatever. When the job I worked at before Four Corner, we had 5 personal holidays, what they're called, and you could take them anytime for whatever reason. And that was 8 years ago. So this isn't like a recent thing. And that was just part of your PTO. You had PTO that you had to put 2 weeks in ahead of time. And then you had basically PTO that you had to give just 24 hours notice.
I think it's, okay. So does it have a negative connotation?
I think right now, yeah, it does have a negative connotation because of it being abused and just, skewered in things like this. I think that, like most things, there's probably a nugget of there are legitimate cases for it, but there's a lot of people who glommed onto it and use it as an excuse to do less, or to just be,
or in Ashley's case, you just take your mental health break while you're live on air and just do it on the fly. Okay,
exactly.
No, sorry, I need to charge my computer. I don't want to die on us.
Okay. So let's go to the next one, because these things to me are in the same category for the most part.
I think it was over here.
Why?
Because it's your job, Eric.
Whoa, Butters. Let's not make this a toxic work environment, okay?
1 second, sir. I'll get that scoop.
Okay. So the toxic work environment, 13 minutes into his job, Cartman declares that being asked to work makes it a toxic work environment. What do you think? What do you think about that?
I mean, it's obvious.
I mean, I think that.
Is it obvious? Because that phrase is used a lot. I mean, a lot. Go on Reddit, go on social media of any kind, and you see the toxic work environment. Again, that was a phrase that didn't exist as far. I mean, I'm sure it existed, but it wasn't widely used up until in the last 10, maybe 15 years. But it was brought on, I think, Peter, by the millennials who. Where does that come from? Are we thinking that workplaces suddenly became much more? First of all, what is toxic? Right? Is toxic? So let's define that. What is a toxic work environment to each of you?
I think the toxicity of a work environment is directly related to the person's level of tolerance. So obviously, if you're a more sensitive or even fragile person, that's going to be more like this, it's obviously a cartoon, but like if you're more used to putting up with things, I guess you're not going to be labeling that a bad boss. Somebody who yells at you, doesn't respect you. I guess that's what I would say. Like people who don't respect you and approach things with a negative manner and put their negativity onto you would be a toxic work environment. By the way, I don't think it's a thing that just existed. I think it's the label. We just labeled something that had been around forever. There's always been bad bosses.
But I think it's exactly like you said, Peter. People are just so sensitive that, even if their boss is just trying to put their foot down and trying to tell them something, they'll take that and be like, oh, this is toxic, just because they can't handle being taking like a critique from their boss.
That's a 180 though of that is, there are legitimate cases like I've had real bad boss, and you work if you're working 40 hours a week, you're working and seeing the people you work with more than you see your family most of the time. So having a bad environment is particularly having like people close that you work to you that it can affect you negatively, and that kind of leads into the whole mental health. It stresses you out.
I have to jump on that because Ricky just put a comment up that is, I think, supports what you just said, which I have to challenge. He said that if you feel sick to your stomach, chest pain on Sunday night at the thought of, chest pain. Just reading that to me, like if you feel chest pain about going into work, you probably need to run more. Okay, get out and get some exercise, because work by definition is not supposed to be a cakewalk. There's a reason you get paid to show up. There's a reason why the harder the job, the rarer the skill, you get paid more. And what if you don't get paid more though? What if you're working that would be the argument. Like you need to quit your job and go find another one.
Fine.
Now it's not that, so what if you are, I don't know, what if you're working at a restaurant and it's not that easy to just, you're living paycheck to paycheck and you can't pay the bills. And if, the search time to find another job is you can't afford that. So like, that's where you're stuck in this, sort of rut where you can't just like leave. Like, how do you categorize?
Well, okay. But put that aside for a second, because what you're talking about there is someone who feels like they don't have other options.
Yes.
So put that aside for a second. What I'm struggling with with this phrase is what defines a toxic work environment. And what you defined it as, you started to, and what Ricky defined it as is how the individual feels about it. How someone individually feels really, to me, has no bearing on the environment itself. Or do they feel that way, for example, because they have to hit sales numbers? Well, that doesn't make the environment toxic. That may be pressure to perform. And if you succumb easily to that pressure, then you may feel heart palpitations or whatever prior to going in. But that doesn't mean the environment's bad. And that's where I think this phrase has been misused and overused, is that it automatically, you put that label out there, it automatically gives the impression the situation in that office space or with that manager is bad. Where I contend that more so it's about how an individual is perceiving it. And so I don't think that makes it a bad environment. I think it makes it a bad environment for that person. Now, are there actual bad environments? Of course there are, but I think that's pretty rare in today's the workplace that I see that we encounter. When do you run into? Do you have friends that work in a genuinely toxic work environment?
I have known people who work in genuinely toxic work environments, and it usually stems from a combination of being underpaid. I'll say, by the way, if you're being paid a lot, your tolerance for toxicity goes pretty high, I would say. So being underpaid, that's going to put it on the map. And then having a bad boss. Those are the two things I see: bad boss or bad coworkers. And I can kind of agree with what you're saying. It's a bad environment for that person. It's pretty easy in offices or in businesses to have, if you've got like really, say a cliquish culture, or, we've seen in our clients and stuff where a group of people will negatively affect the culture of an office. And I guess that's where I can kind of go down the toxic road. So when someone new comes in and they're, enthusiastic maybe, and they're surrounded by poor performers who drag the other person down, I could see that being toxic. I can agree. I think it's, overused, and it becomes kind of like a catch-all term, and almost like it loses any of the genuine meaning whenever like people misuse it. Like with a lot of things, if there's legitimate cases of it, and it delegitimizes it if everybody is every single bad, little thing that, like you said, if I can't hit my metrics, that's toxic. No, like if you've got a boss who's screaming at you every day because you can't hit your metrics in an unprofessional way, that might be toxic. But you just not being able to do your job, that's not toxic.
I feel like most of my friends work from home, and they never complain about toxic work environment, again, because you're at home, you're barely even interacting with your coworkers. The only time they'll say it's toxic is, like you said, Pete, when they're feeling the most pressure, but they're using toxic work environment the wrong way, because just because if you're feeling pressure, that doesn't make it toxic. That's just, you're just not organizing things properly, or you're just not handling it well.
Do you think that what would be considered toxic by most people today, do you think there's a difference in generational perspectives on that? So I'll give you my perspective that I worked in an environment where the standard hours were, and you guys know the story, were 70-hour work weeks. You were told that in the interview prior to working. That was not exaggeration. Everyone was yelled at constantly. Yeah, the language was awful that was used. There was no thought to being condescending, but the company also didn't necessarily apologize for operating that way. They kind of told you who they were. And in the second example I'll use is today this morning on Twitter, I saw that a post about a top 20 law firm that was telling their future employees that they have to be available 24/7. They have to they're going to be held to a very, very high standard, effectively. I mean, I don't have the details in front of me, but the exchange on Twitter, they were criticized for that. The company, I mean, the post was intended to make this law firm look bad, but half the people, presumably older, right? Because I do think it's a generational difference, was like, what's wrong with that? If they want to be excellent, they demand a very high standard. Why is that a bad thing? So I don't think what is often like hard work and intensity and sense of urgency and long hours, I don't think any of those things are toxic. I don't, but I think that's probably an unpopular opinion for people younger than me.
I would make the argument also, though, that older people, when their ideas of the workplace are not the same today is not the same workplace that it was 20 years ago when they were in the prime of their career. With the advent of the internet and being available, like I can be probably easily twice as productive as my dad was when he was in an office doing, just because I've got automation programs, I've got all these, so I can get probably the same level of work done in half the time. And I'm available, there's things like Slack, there's things like voice over phone, so I can be accessible at all those times when I would say that someone being in the office, just because someone's working in an office in the 90s for 13, 14 hours for the day, they're not doing work for 14 hours of the day. I will guarantee that at a certain level, there's diminishing returns. So people were doing the same amount of work, just because they showed up. It's like, in Japan where people go sleep at their office to prove that they're working hard. They're not actually.
Or you realize you're describing Elon Musk right now. And
yeah.
I guess you would make an argument that he's not very productive.
What is productive?
I don't know.
On Twitter all the time,
sending rockets into space and building electric.
He's not doing that though. That's a different company that he's not even actively running right now.
Okay. That's an interesting perspective, because I would say that there's a direct correlation between effort and success, and that I disagree entirely with that statement where you say you can do twice as much in the same amount of time. Well, then you could produce but you're only going to produce at the same level if you only work half the time. Where if you work the same amount of time, you're going to produce twice as much, and that should be the goal. So I struggle with that because I think that's the easy answer.
If you're making, if you're in you have a unique point of view because you've come from a sales background, so you are directly rewarded by commission. That so if you're in that type of career, I would say yes, that you want to work as much as to make as much money. If you're working in a job where you're paid a flat salary and you're like, why should I work work twice as hard to put up have like this maximum output? It's not going to make me more money. Sure, I can maybe get a better review, but I'm going to get X amount adjusted a year. Like, why should I do that? I think that the object, like right now, you're seeing a shift with millennials and with Gen Z. It seems like the objective is more work-life balance and over income and maybe even job security. That they're not looking for these big raises and promotions. They're looking for the mental health, and that's where this whole episode is kind of like, I think, coming from. So if you come at it from that point of view, you can kind of see.
We have a comment on LinkedIn. Jackie said, I agree that there is a generational gap in the term toxic work environment. Too often I hear a hard job is toxic, while older generations will accept the difficulties of a role as just part of their responsibilities.
And maybe that's just not putting up with it. I mean, my parents, it was very common for people to work at a company for 30 years and get the gold watch and you retire. And not even my parents, I guess it was their parents. My grandparents. So that's not a common thing anymore. You don't see that sort of longevity in people's careers. And that's, I think, part of the shift in the environment.
Well, I mean, I was with my sister yesterday. She just hit 30 years with Hilton, and she started out, I hope she wouldn't mind me saying this, but her first job out of college with Hilton was working the front desk, I think like a late night shift in downtown Atlanta at a hotel, I think making $8 an hour as a college graduate. And she's someone that I've observed and admired, who has always gone above and beyond and just worked, done whatever she was asked to do. She would do that as well as she could and then do more. And now she's a vice president with the organization and has been rewarded. So I suspect, Peter, she's gone above and beyond her job description on many occasions. And so your question, I think, rhetorical, but I'll still answer it. Why would someone want to do that? Well, because they're ambitious and they want to succeed upwardly. And that is, to me, how success happens. And I can't separate that from, so if you, now, does everyone need to do it? No, not everyone is going to. This is not about need. This is just about whether it's bad. If this organization, the one I mentioned earlier that I saw this law firm on Twitter this morning, they put very high expectations on their people. Great. If you don't want to do that, don't go there. But don't declare that the organization is bad or the environment's bad. It's just bad for you, and that's okay, right? I mean, I think that's actually
that's well said. I think.
Where are you with all this?
I mean, I feel like success is kind of changing. Gen Z expects everything to pretty much be handed to them. They expect like praise. They expect like gold stars, like I said. So I'm starting to think, well, I mean, it's kind of true. Like, who doesn't like that? And if you don't get that, then it's considered, toxic work environment because no one likes getting yelled at constantly. But I think like nowadays success is, trying to find, like, if you're not moving up like at a job that you've been at for like a couple years, if you try and go find a job that maybe will pay you more, maybe like if you're making more money, I think that's now what people are looking for, not as much as like changing roles. Do you know what I mean? So
well, Pete's sister is a good example, but I would say a lot. I mean, I can only speak for my generation. We came of age, 2008, 2009. So that's there was the whole housing market crash. I've seen two, once in a lifetime recessions or events in my professional career. I don't think that the trust is there for the workers in the company. So working it your way up in a company requires you to trust that they're going to do the right thing by you. You put in your time, you're going to get promoted. And that's not always the case. I mean, my father was back in 2008. He was laid off at his company that he worked very hard at for years. That's a thing that I think is common for a lot of people in my generation is at the end of the day, you're going to look out for yourself. And we've talked about this on videos before. So why should I work at a company for a long time if they're not going to, I'm going to jump ship the minute I get, a better opportunity. And at Zengig, that's a thing that we kind of promote is you always want to be looking out for your best interest and for the position that's going to be best for you. So I think that's the shift in the job market.
Well, I think you of course should be self-serving, and but those things aren't mutually exclusive either from being a good employee of the organization, where usually that is a means to an end, where if you do the best job you can, you're going to rise above your peers. You're going to be exposed to greater responsibilities and given more opportunities to succeed that will prepare you for what comes next. So to me, those things are tied together. If you want to be a bare minimum performer, you can do that and keep your job, but you're going to be limited in the opportunities that are presented to you. And that's okay. But I think a healthy relationship should be one that is mutually beneficial. And I am not naive. I don't think any employees would show up tomorrow if we said, "Hey, nobody's getting paychecks from now on." Right? I mean, that's part of the deal. Conversely, I don't think any employees who show up would say, "Hey, I'm not going to work anymore, but I want to continue to get my paycheck." So, I think these things have to be, when done right, and you should constantly assess. Just because are you in a situation that's leading you where you ultimately want to end up? I mean, that's really what I think of more than anything else. Are you on that path? And if not, change it, right? But just because you have to work hard doesn't mean it's a bad path. I think that's
absolutely not.
All right. So should we move on from this? Should we play the next clip? We're at 40 minutes. What's next, Ashley?
Maybe let's just do one more. Okay.
I think we got one more.
This one.
Hey, Butters.
Eric, where are you?
I wasn't feeling the best, so I decided to work from home.
Butters, what's going on?
Eric says he's going to work from home.
How can he work from home? This is an ice cream shop.
Yeah, no, because see, I'm actually taking a mental health day. Yeah, young people can just ask for a mental health day, and employers can't deny them. It's my mental health day.
Eric, you need to come here right now, or we're both going to get fired.
All right, there it is. Mental health day again. So I think we've beaten that up pretty well at this point. So it is overused, right? Do we agree on that?
Yeah, I think it's overused. I mean, it's like I said. I think your reasoning for doing, taking a day off. If you have that banked and you can do that, your reason shouldn't really matter.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like if you're so stressed to the point where you need to take a mental health break, maybe you need to change something. Maybe you need to change your environment, or maybe you need to organize yourself better and prioritize your things better, so that way it'll be less stressful, where you don't need to go and take a mental health break.
Yeah, I mean, if burnout is, that's the main, I guess, the cause. You want to take the mental health days is to avoid burnout. And maybe you have that conversation with your boss and changing. I've been working on this project for so long and it's burning me out. Is there any other things I could maybe do instead? Shift your responsibilities. Maybe there's a different, issue or something you can work on. And I know that's not the case for every job, but communication, I feel like would be the key, or being honest with yourself about maybe this isn't the job for me, and maybe I need to go back on the job market and look for something that is a better fit.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point, that if you're feeling that way, there's a bigger picture consideration and problem that you should look at, and it's just not maybe a good fit for you.
Yeah,
all right.
If you got the Sunday scaries, you need to reevaluate. It's a bigger issue.
Yeah.
Again, though, I mean, it's we just have to separate. I think that no one's going to work without reason to, and generally that reason is the compensation that's tied to it, or future advancement, or whatever. So it's not always going to be rainbows and butterflies, and that's okay. Like, that's to me the difference, is that work by definition is going to suck on occasion, and that's okay. Like right now, I choose to do what I do. I have 100% choice. I don't have a boss. I don't report to anyone. And you know what? A lot of times it sucks, but I do it anyway because it's what I'm supposed to do. It's the right thing to do. And I could bail, but I'm going to hurt myself, right? I mean, and I'm not willing to do that. So that is where I struggle with this. It's like, man, like when things get tough, like step up. Like that's how you become valuable to an organization. I mean, not to go too far on this silly South Park episode, but Eric is, from day one as an awful employee, as anyone who watches the show would expect Eric Cartman to be. So like that's not a coincidence that they played it out that way. I think they're making a pretty good point with that.
Yeah, I think it's if stuff's difficult, it's expected. It's where it becomes chronic, and every single week is difficult, and you hate it. That and you start to dread it. That's where you need to reevaluate. But just like everything in life, there's going to be ups and there's going to be downs. So I think that's to be expected, and you just have to stick through it a little bit.
And I think, like, let's just say if you hate it, try to make the best of it. Try to enjoy it. Like if you're doing some work and you could pop some headphones in and listen to music, do that. Like again, try to make it as enjoyable as possible. You don't have to be miserable. If you're miserable, then you're choosing to be, because some days, like you guys said, are going to be better than others. And sometimes I think, like, okay, if you go to a different job, that job's probably going to be hard too, and probably not as enjoyable. So I feel like you just have to make the best of it. Unless it's honestly terrible, then just go to a different one. And
if you're miserable, go to zengig.com, and we got plenty of articles to help you find a new career.
Exactly.
Yeah, and then that's a very personal thing, right? What one person's objectives are vastly different from another. So I'm glad you brought that up. That's a good point. Mm-hmm. All right, Ash, what's next?
Two more clips.
Yeah, go.
2 more clips.
Roll it.
Okay.
Home.
What?
Let me restart that.
Okay. Can I work from home?
What?
No, you can't work from home. It's a hot dog stand.
Well, I could work here, but I'll need mental health days off to deal with the toxic environment.
Where do people get this stuff? All right, fine. Never mind. We don't want to hire you.
You're gonna take my job?
All right. So I think we've talked about that a little bit. This working from home, that is, again, generationally, I think people from my generation are struggling with it. They're seeing a lot of downside to it. I see both. I think there is downside, there's upside, but I also think it is the point that this is making here is that it's making it really hard to hire, because there's an expectation now that, Ashley, your generation is not as open to what was just a given a couple of years ago.
I mean, yeah. So my one friend, she works at a bank, and she was telling me, I really want to work from home. Like, I'm tired of working at a bank. Like, can you help me find a job where I can work from home? And I'm like, it's hard, especially like if you have experience with banking. Unfortunately, like that's what you're gonna do. Like I feel like, especially waitressing. Like let's just say, okay, a waitress comes up to you and she says, I want to work from home. You can't do that, unfortunately, when it's like restaurant life. You can't work from home and work at a restaurant. So there's always going to be like that divide, and unfortunately not everyone can do it. So it's like, I don't know, everyone wants to. That's the point. And there's jobs out there that can't accommodate with that.
It's like we've been saying, it's changing the entire job market. So that's businesses are going to have to adapt, because if that's how the generation, Gen Z and millennials, if that's how people want it, and that's not going to change, like your business is either going to adapt or die.
Well, let me ask you, how much of that do you think could change if the economy shifts and the job market shifts in a negative trend, as many think it will, as some of the signs are showing that it has started to. The jobs report that came out, as we talked about early on, was not great. It wasn't awful, but it's a bad trend. There's fewer jobs being created. The layoffs aren't stopping. There's some signs in the economy that aren't going in the right direction. So fast forward and just hypothetically, what if unemployment starts to increase? You think that this mentality, because it came on overnight, right? COVID, I mean, none of this existed pre-COVID, this concept of like working from home is a given. Now it is, but do you think it could go away just as quickly if the job market does a 180?
I think it could go back to a certain point. Obviously, supply and demand. If there's less of a supply of, remote jobs, and the pay is going to have to adjust and all those things. But I think that after being so fully remote and everybody, now before it was a small fraction where it had actually gotten to experience it. Now there's so many people who've actually done it. And I don't think it'll ever go back to the way it was. Now, could it shift more towards, companies having a little bit more of the power? Well, like what you're saying, I think, sure. That's obvious. That's a real possibility, but I don't think that the attitudes are ever going to change. So maybe temporarily, but as soon as things clear up and, the market's up, you're going to have another great resignation of people leaving and going to, the types of jobs they want to.
Yeah, I think, well, the numbers indicate that with skilled positions, it's going to be, there's going to be a labor shortage by far.
Yeah.
For the foreseeable future. The restaurant positions those are going to be tough because that business
that are
model
inherently in person.
Well, yeah, they have to be in person, and they're used to the restaurants don't pay a whole lot. I think on an hourly rate, so that model is going to continue to have to figure out where its right place is. Are they going to raise prices a lot? Well, consumers don't want that. Are we going to see restaurants change? I know I was reading an article a couple days ago about the frequency with which they're going to be automated. In the fast food restaurants in particular, they can't make the numbers work in many cases, so they're going to be replacing people who take orders with just automated screens and that sort of thing. It already exists, but I think it's going to become more prevalent. So that's going to be interesting to watch play out.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was even I saw on TikTok, I think it was in Japan or China or something, there were these robots that were serving people and they could place their order on the robot. So who knows?
We already got that touchscreen ordering and all that stuff. So
yeah.
All right. Last one.
Okay.
Damn it, you guys, it isn't gonna work like this, okay?
I'm also gonna need 5-minute break.
Hold on. Let's restart.
Now listen, it's gonna take dedication and drive to get this place open. Isn't that right, Kenny? Sorry, Kenny's working from home today because it's his mental health day.
Okay. Hi.
Now, there may not be many of us, but in order to open, we're gonna have to...
Do I get mental health days too?
Oh, here we go. Fine, Clyde, what days do you need to have mental health days?
Well, how should I know until I'm feeling mentally unhealthy?
I mean, it's
so the employee becomes the employer, right? I mean, I think that's the point. We could make that about what happens when you're on the other side of this. It's a different consideration, right? It sounds different when you're the one hearing it versus the one saying it.
Yeah. I mean, if you're a man, you've done, behaved in a certain way, and say you get promoted and you're the manager now, and you've got your team that's calling out and putting, that onto you. Nobody, I think that if you truly believe that that's an important thing and you're willing to utilize it in mental health days in this case, then if you're on the receiving end, you have to be turnabout is fair play. So you have to be all in. I don't think you can be hypocritical about that.
Well, and so the opposite of that is you can see why it's hard for me with this stuff, because it's not at all, and other people my age, because it's so different than how we grew up professionally, where I I struggle with this stuff because it sounds like it's out of left field to me half the time. It really does. And I understand that my perspective, it doesn't matter what my perspective is. I need to be able to put that aside and say, okay, what's going to work? What's going to be best for the situation, for the organization anyway. But I do struggle with it. I think you guys know that because we talk openly about these things. And when I saw that tweet this morning criticizing the law firm for expecting just a very high performance, my honest thought was, that's a law firm I'd want to hire. That's who if I needed a lawyer, that's who I'd want to go to because their bar is so high. I know what I'm going to get. And when you start lowering the bar, well, what you get is what we see here on the screen, I think. And is that crazy? Or do you guys agree with that?
Well, if you're a company and you say that I'm going to expect X, and it's either going to work out or it's not. I mean, if it's too unreasonable, you're not going to get any employees and you're not going to be able to do it. But if there's people that are willing to put up with that and are willing to accept that and work, then great, fine. You as a candidate don't have to go work there if that's something that you don't agree with.
It's your choice. Yeah.
Well,
let the market decide.
Just the way you say put up with it, right? Like that inherently is a negative way of looking at it versus saying, again, if you go down the line of truly successful organizations or successful individuals, forget organizations, it's never the bare minimum, is it? I mean, could you think of an example where because we never got, somehow we skipped over bare minimum Mondays and all this. That was something that I don't know how we missed that clip, since we looked at it right before we started recording. But can you work bare minimum Mondays and achieve a high level of success?
No, but I think that if that's what do you define as success? Do you define success as having a good, strong home life and raising your kid and all that, and not really worrying about getting promoted and making more money? That's, I think, what the Gen Z is really promoting on that, is they're not as interested in the upward career climbing. Maybe that's all I can see when I hear about Bearman, which, by the way, I had to look up because I hadn't heard of it before. That's what I see, is people's just defining success differently.
I mean, I also think it also depends on the person. Like, let's just say you have bare minimum Mondays. Okay, you have all the rest of the week to work super hard and get on top of everything and do your best.
Well, except for take it easy Tuesdays.
Yeah.
So, well, yeah.
Go on. Put that aside. Go on.
So yeah, I don't know. I feel like if they just have, like, I think in the UK or something, they only work 4 days a week. They have Fridays or Mondays off, and apparently they're more productive. So
yeah, there's been studies.
They have bare minimum, or like they have no Mondays where they're not doing anything, and then the rest of the week they're working really hard. They're like doing really well, and they're showing like good progress. So
there's been studies by proponents of that. Just for
work week.
Huh?
I feel like
of the 4-day work week. Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like it's just, again, it depends on the person. If let's just say, there's going to be one day where you're not going to be as creative, you're not going to do your best, like you're probably going to do the bare minimum, but then you go strong the next day. So again, I don't know. I feel like unless you're just doing the bare minimum every day. Then...
Well, there's always the thought that people say, well, I'm going to work smarter, not harder. And I always think, well, what if I'm going to work smarter too, but I'm going to work harder and therefore I'm going to win. So Peter, to answer your question, it depends on how you define success. I think in terms of competitive success is really all I'm thinking of in this case, right? There's, again, we're talking about a ridiculous story in a cartoon, but they're trying to establish a new business. Can they succeed that way? I maybe, but you have to have a really unique idea and do something that doesn't really have true competition. I just don't know how to succeed that way professionally. I'd like to work less, but I feel like, well, I'm going to achieve less if I work less.
I mean, look at it this way again with this clip. Eric could have just went in there, cooked the hot dogs, and done everything himself without hiring anybody. He could have put that hard work in and just started with that. But no, he was hiring employees with money he didn't even have. He could have, like just worked harder and he would have had success like Butters when he went in there and just did everything himself and got all of his money back. So, I mean, that's kind of something you should look at too.
Well, I mean, just look at the South Park guys, right? What are they? They're known. They're obviously comedic geniuses, but one of the things that they're known for is putting in ridiculously long hours to produce these shows each week. I mean, there's a documentary on it. That's what is everyone who's been a South Park fan knows that. And I hear those stories, and think that's not a coincidence, right? If what is it, Matt Parker and Trey Stone, I think, are the two guys that started South Park. If they were working 40 hours a week, would South Park still exist? I say no way.
But they're also the show creators, so that's not like an apples to apples as like somebody who's a engineer working as a mid-level engineer at a company. That's not the same thing.
And to that point, I mean, I don't expect someone who started a business. I don't expect anyone to work the kind of hours I work necessarily. I mean, I don't. I get that, but I also think that there's a direct correlation, right? I mean, I think Ricky wants to be on the show. When I look at all the comments, I think he's feeling like he wished he was with us. But so, Ashley, do you think that there's going to be a time where your generation it realizes, hey, if I want more, I have to work more, right? Because it's nice to say work-life balance, and the connotation for that, I believe, is don't work very many hours, right? And Peter, I would argue that you mentioned being a good parent. I think I've been a pretty good parent. I've always worked a lot of hours, but I've always coached my kids in all their games and had dinner at home every night, and been involved in all their activities, and never really felt that I missed anything.
I mean, again, I feel like it depends on the person. Some people are naturally just great at like doing a bunch of stuff at once, like kind of multitasking and having a bunch of stuff going on their day. Other people struggle with having so much on their plate. They need like that balance per se. I mean, I think you asked that question before, if eventually like my generation would start like working harder to realize like that's how they could achieve success. But I mean, it's like you said, you could also work smarter, and sometimes that works out too. It depends on the person. If they're coming up with something really good constantly and just always doing their best, and they're not working so many hours, they could still potentially advance a little bit. Maybe not as quickly, but they'll get there eventually.
Well,
I think it depends on the person.
If you, as an employer, I think the key to avoid all this, and what it seems like to me, is giving your employees a sense of ownership and a sense of like the ability to advance. Because if you are at a job and you're like, I got to work here for 5 years to even be eligible for my next, like that's not very motivating for you to put in anything extra. Now, if you're like at a job where if I work really hard, I can get promoted. I can see the path clearly to the next position, and this project is mine, and I'll be directly rewarded for its success. That motivates you to work harder. If you're just stuck, you're not going to want to do it. So I think that's a way that employers can avoid all this.
All right, so we've been on an hour. I agree with you both. I don't know, Ashley. I don't know if I agree with you on that, though, that it's going to happen. Because, again, you use the argument, well, I'm just going to work smarter. Well, your competition's working smarter, presumably.
What if you even work even smarter?
Even smarter? Well, I mean, look,
what if you top them, like
what you can get away with is what your peers are doing. If everybody's doing it, then you can get away with it. But if
but I
Who did
think
they
if
come
your
up with something
goal, it
better?
depends on what your goal is. Of course, that's a factor. Is your goal? I mean, I think that there's if your goal is to work as little as possible, have as much free time as possible, maybe to look at it that way, then that is a different path than to achieve financial success, for example, right? I don't think you. That's where I don't think you can do both. And as life goes on, I think that's where I look back and say, gosh, I wish I would have put in more time earlier because at 52, I'm working more now than I thought I would, that I would like to. I would like to be on the downside of that. But I, I still have a lot of things that I need to accomplish and do, and that's not going to happen. I don't know, I don't know an easy route to that. So that's where I think that life is expensive. Like life is really expensive. I have 4 kids. That the bills don't pay themselves, and I don't think I think my ability to provide the life I want for them is a direct correlation to how hard I'm willing to work to achieve it. And I mean, that just seems like a given, but I do worry that younger people think success should happen easier and faster. And that's where that's where this gets me, because I go, when I see all this stuff, I mean, that's kind of the net of all this for me, is I go, yeah, it's hard. Like, it's hard, and you do have to work. If you want to have achieve at any high level, you do have to work hard. And I will tell you, all the choices I made professionally to personally to not miss games and to not miss activities and be home at night has limited my professional success. So even though I didn't work as hard as I could have, and there's a downside to that. So everything's a trade-off.
Yeah, I think that's the lesson takeaway. It's a trade-off.
Ashley, what do you say? Wrap us up.
Like, yeah.
Oh, I agree. I guess we'll see how the future goes with everything. I don't know.
All right, an hour. We're an hour in. I think we could say goodbye then. Peter, any last thoughts?
No last thoughts from me. We'll see how the market dictates that if this is gonna go on, or if this is gonna change.
Exactly.
I think we'll just have to wait and see. I don't think we're ever gonna go back to the way things were, though.
No, probably
Yeah,
not.
I don't think so.
All right, then goodbye for now.
Okay.
We'll be back
Later,
next
Bye,
week.
guys.